Guess you made it under the wire. Yeah.
You want to have to be able to show you what that is. It's probably an iPhone. It's a cool little trick I learned.
Leave it to you to learn it. You like that stuff.
Myself, that's my.
That's your deal.
Watch is off.
Okay, I'd like to call this meeting to order. It's Monday, April 9th, 2018. It's 5:30 PM, and we are in the City Hall Council Chambers. Roll call, Patty.
Cyphers. Present. Hawkins.
Present.
Hassick.
Here.
Peters.
Here.
Zarling.
Here.
It's been determined that we have a quorum, and we will now do the Pledge of Allegiance. First item on tonight's agenda is to approve the agenda, and it was in your packet. Is there a motion, please, to approve the agenda as presented?
So moved.
Second.
Motion offered by Zarling and second by Peters. Is there any further discussion? All in favor of the motion, say aye.
Aye.
All opposed, motion carried. Next item is the reading of our minutes from March 16th, 2018, and the minutes were also included in your packet. Is there a motion, please, to approve the
So
minutes?
moved.
Second.
Motion offered by Peters and second by Zarling. Is there any further discussion? All in favor of the motion, say aye.
Aye.
All opposed, motion carried. Next item is 15.1, resolution to apply to participate in the National Flood Insurance Program. And Mike.
If you recall, last council meeting, we passed a resolution adopting our flood insurance ordinance. Well, we forgot to have you adopt an ordinance entering into the flood insurance program. So what we're doing tonight is the resolution 2018-11 is the resolution to participate in the flood insurance program. So staff recommends approval so we can get in the program.
Is there a motion, please, to approve this resolution as presented?
So moved.
Second.
Motion offered by Zarling and second by Hassick. Is there any further discussion? Roll call vote, please, Patty.
Cyphers. Yes. Hassick.
Yes.
Hawkins.
Yes.
Peters.
Yes.
Zarling.
Yes.
Resolution is passed. 15.2, Railroad Quiet Zone, and Mike.
I've had some people over the last few weeks talk to me about the noise, their train whistles, and I thought we had just talked about this, but it was 2015, so I just want to refresh people. There's a process called, a community can apply for called quiet zones. It is an elimination of any train whistle early warnings. In order to do that, all of your at-grade street and rail crossings have to be signaled with actual arms that come down. We have 4 crossings that are not signaled like that. The other part of that is there would also have to be medians installed so you couldn't drive around the cross arms. So looking at that, not as easy a process as one might have thought. We have Indus Street, Prairie, Pioneer Drive, and Fair Lakes, all that do not have arms. Prairie, at some point, based on the estimated traffic volume, may be eligible for some state and federal funding based on the traffic counts. We just put, the state and federal government just put arms at Main Street. So Main Street. So we're looking at that. The biggest thing is the cost, and it's $1.6 million for those, or $1,160,000 for the crossing gates or crossing arms, as I call them. And some communities plan to do a few a year. Others, it's just been too costly. And as an example, there are 853 cities in Minnesota. 27 have quiet zones. So it's not a big program, but it's generally, because we are requesting this, there are no state or federal funds to help us with that, the funding of those cross arms. So unless, of course, we have the traffic counts like we have had on a couple. So we may get Prairie eligible for those at some point, but it could be a while. The other issue that I've heard a lot about in terms of trains is just the waiting time. and the number of trains that are going by. So, and people have talked about, well, I thought it was, they were required to, they couldn't stop the cars for more than 10 minutes. Well, it is a 10-minute rule if the train's stopped. But if it's moving, there isn't, I mean, as long as it's moving. The other side of it is, and Libby knows all too well, that the law does allow us to issue a citation to the railroad, but you have to issue it to the corporation. Can't have a police officer drive up to the locomotive engineer and say, hey, wait a minute, here's your ticket for blocking the crossing for 10 minutes. And so who do you send the ticket to at the headquarters of the Union Pacific Railroad and all of that? So I am working with the Union Pacific Railroad and their management team to say, what can we do about this? We think that part of our problem this winter may have been a switch that was icing up or had some problems with snow, but we'll continue to work on that. I know I've got a call from the Mayo Clinic, and I'm working with the administration out there to have both of us maybe apply a little pressure to Union Pacific Railroad and try to keep the trains moving as much as possible. So it's kind of my update on quiet zones and just some of the delays we've had. I've sat there a couple times myself, and we send out a lot of what they call unit trains, so they're 75 to 100 cars, and they're all 52 feet long, so by the time you add that up, they could be a mile long, and you just don't drive around leave State Street and drive down to Prairie, because chances are they're still coming, so, or coming down the track. So, you know, with that, we'll do the best we can and take questions on quiet zones or the delays at the traffic signals.
No, I appreciate that. I was one who got some, it's interesting, the number of things that people call their city councilman about, and I understand that's important, but it's just one of those things I'm learning in this job. You get a lot of calls on those kind of things. So I'm glad to hear that you already had a plan in place, and I think working with Mayo will be a good idea. Get some pressure from them. That's being an emergency situation. So thanks for doing that, Mike.
I can understand people's frustration with that whole thing if you are in a hurry, or not even in a hurry, if you have left early and you want to get to work and you can't get to work because the train's in the way. And so I can understand that. And we did talk about that at our Saturday with the city, our very first one. Someone had brought up trains
That's right. Yeah.
at that meeting too. So there are some people that are very, very concerned, and just so that they know that Mike's working on it and that doing the best that we can.
But the flip side, it's commerce,
You know, that's
Yeah, right.
exactly right.
and it's good for the city.
It is good for the city, yeah, but it is frustrating, it can be very.
So when you wake up at 2
frustrating.
in the morning from a train whistle, just think of that.
Yeah,
Bruce.
just,
Yeah.
yep.
I know my hometown, they pulled them all out and really hurt the economy.
Yes, exactly, yep. Any other questions or comments? Thank you.
Is there?
Oh, go ahead.
Yeah, I'm sorry.
That's all right.
Is that just a throughway now, or are they making stops? They used to come right through town because of elevators, and are we just a throughway now, or are there places in town that they stop and load?
Oh, well, they load unit trains, 75 to 100 cars at both the ethanol plant and CHS. I don't know if it's daily, but several times a week.
Okay, but nothing right in town that they're stopping.
Well, they have to, well,
Well, they have to go through, I realize that.
That's in town.
yeah, they're in our city limits.
I'm thinking within the.
Yeah, I
areas where
think
people
they,
complain.
you know, they still might shuttle a couple cars to Hancore, maybe something to Fairmont Foods, not 100% sure, but the other smaller elevators I don't think are receiving any. One of the elevators used to do some edible soybeans, and they would get a car occasionally.
I was thinking, but yeah, I guess because of that makes sense. I was thinking, well, maybe there's a way to reroute them around the city now if they're not stopping in town, but, you know, that's close enough that, yeah, you can't. So I was just thinking outside.
One route in and one route out.
Yeah, right.
Thank you, everyone. 15.3, presentation on the city's ADA transition plan process, and Troy.
Evening, Mayor and Council. I'm just going to do a brief discussion about the ADA, the Americans with Disabilities Act, and a portion of it that relates to the city's public right-of-way and then another piece that they have titled the transition plan. We're going to talk a little bit about the city's need to get this portion of it completed. So we're just going to touch on a couple pieces here. Again, ADA I don't think is really new to many of us. Maybe applies or has come into play more within buildings, but it also is something that we need to comply with within our right-of-way and within our street and street construction projects. As you can see, there's 20% of Americans live with disabilities, and that rate of disability increases with age, as could be expected. In 1990 was when the original act was approved, and it prohibits states and local governments from discriminating against individuals with disabilities. So you can see the groups that are affiliated with the implementing the ADA Act, and it falls all the way down to the local agencies as far as the implementation role. For quite some time, there have been standards and guidelines for public right-of-way. You can see in 2006, they released the first full guideline booklet for those standards and guidelines, and have been modified quite frequently since then. MnDOT also has standards that we use. A lot of those standards apply to our street projects as well, and requirements. A good example of the standards is to look at Trunk Highway 15. That was done last summer. If you look at each of those intersections, they were brought up to code, and that was a major portion of that reconstruction project, was bringing each of those intersections up to code with push buttons and the beeping and everything for the crosswalks, and getting the slopes and the ramps to meet all the accessibility requirements. So as I said, these design standards trickle down into our city projects. The main design component being the pedestrian access routes. Those are the pieces that we have to look at for each of our projects, and you can see all the factors that go into that. They set minimums and standards for each of those components along the access route. Again, as I said, part of the overall rule that was done in 1990 talks about a transition plan. And this is actually a document that communities or local agencies are required to put together to identify, number one, kind of do a self-evaluation of what issues there are, and then also to evaluate what facilities you have now and what improvements are needed. Basically documenting that. We've followed these guidelines as best as we can. In the past few years, this is kind of more of a document that's being required. It actually is becoming a requirement for federal funding beginning in the fiscal year 2019. So for federal aid, to receive federal aid funds, all communities or local agencies will need to have this transition plan in place and approved by the council. Again, we go through, evaluate ourselves, we get some community input, and then we bring this back to the council. The last piece here just talks about the next steps. We're doing the initial kind of public informational piece of this now. We are putting up on the city website a survey that people can access and complete online. We're also going to be doing a kind of a targeted mailing to the businesses and agencies that deal specifically with disabled persons, and try and get some feedback from them. Doing any other self-evaluation within our facilities and within our plan sets and how we do construction plans moving forward. Last summer, we did an inventory of the existing facilities at all of our intersections and all the curb ramps, basically, within the city. I think we came up to about 1,100 curb ramps within the city that we have. There's a pretty low percentage of them that meet the current requirements, so it's part of this transition plans identifies that, and then also puts a dollar amount to it. So we've started the draft of the transition plan. Again, with all the other communities doing this, the local road research board had developed a template that we've utilized to kind of base our plan off of. We will be bringing that transition plan back to the council, the draft, after we gather some public input. We'll have then the draft out for review for some time, and then we'll bring the final transition plan back to the council here in the next couple of months to get that approved. So
Okay.
that was my brief summary and introduction. This presentation and the survey will both be on the city website tomorrow for people to go and access. If they have other questions, are there any questions from the council?
What is there any expectation in the transition, how long the transition gets to be? Can we determine that, or are they having some expectations on? what
As of right
size?
now, I don't think there's any hard and fast expectations. As you can see, it's been some time that this has been sitting out there, and now they're just coming to the requirement of developing the plan. As long as you've identified that and are doing what's feasible as of now, that's,
Your
that's
expectations are
acceptable.
not gonna force us to be rushing this through to get it
I
done?
don't, not as of right now,
And
no.
we've been doing it pretty much as we've been doing
As
road
we do
construction. we've been
reconstruction
adding them.
projects, yep. Yeah.
Highway 15, though, is very nice. The access that people have to the sidewalks and to the streets is very, very nice. And,
I agree.
yeah. Any other questions for Troy at this time? Thanks, Troy. 15.4, ENRTF grant application. And Troy, it's you again.
Staff is looking at putting together a grant application for the Environment and Natural Resources Trust Fund, is what everything stands for there. It's part of some of the legacy funding that was approved in 2006, I believe. So what we're looking at doing with this specific project is kind of a water quality pilot system on the city-owned property that's west of Hall Lake in the Dutch Creek watershed. Looking at doing a rather large in scale, but for our watershed, relatively small, wood chip bioreactor that will help to hopefully address some of the nitrates that might be coming in from that watershed into the Hall Lake system. This would be fully funded by this grant source. There wouldn't be any city funding match requirements. This resolution is basically just requesting the council to show support for this project. It would be fully funded by the grant, and we would hopefully get a pilot up. The big question mark with this type of system right now is how well do they function in cold weather? And so they're looking at some different modifications to the basic wood chip bioreactor to see if we can find some efficiency or some effectiveness in the cold weather, such as now when we're getting the early spring runoff. So this kind of a 3-year program. I believe the grant is around $175,000 that we're requesting. So just asking for the council, number one, questions, and if there aren't any, to support this grant application.
Okay. Any questions for Troy at this time?
Yeah, I do.
Sure.
Is this, what does pilot mean? Is this, I know that you'd had planned to put a pond on that property to filter. Would this be like, pilot means smaller?
This would be a little bit smaller scale. It's really more to test these design modifications to just a standard wood chip bioreactor that
Okay.
will hopefully make it effective in the colder temperatures. That's the big test. So if that works, that would be part of a bigger, hopefully a bigger treatment system that could be done if we can show
So
effectiveness.
it'd
with
be
this.
almost like the start of the whole system.
Kind
would
of,
be,
yep, yep.
You know,
But your nitrates aren't as high in the winter, are they?
Well, when they're really the target, whenever we're getting snow melt and the runoff, so like right now is
Right
kind
now,
of,
or-
as
okay.
we're starting to see them come up slowly. And, until temperatures get up into that 60 degrees is kind of the key point when nitrification doesn't work anymore. So we really need it to function a little better under cold temperatures and get the removal efficiencies that they're seeing. They are seeing pretty good removal efficiencies with this system, but in warmer temperatures and smaller watersheds.
Okay. Any other questions for Troy? If not, is there please a motion to approve Resolution 2018-13?
So moved.
Second.
Motion
Third.
offered by Peters and second by
Guys are also
Hassick.
fast.
Is there any further discussion? Roll call vote, please, Patty.
Hawkins,
Yes.
Peters,
Yes.
Zarling,
Yes.
Cyphers. Yes. Hassett.
Yes.
Resolution has passed. 17, Mike, do you have any comments that you'd like to? Okay. Anybody else have any comments that they'd like to bring up at this time to the council?
I do. I just want to, not to belabor something, but just curious about the policy about not responding to editorials. Is that something that's written down somewhere, or is this just kind of been a desire of the staff, or what?
I can only speak to history, and that's been that two issues. First of all, an editorial is somebody's opinion, and it's always been most people's thoughts that everybody's entitled to their opinion. If the council differs with, I mean, if it's an issue that directly impacts the council, generally when the council gets to the point where it's going to have a discussion about it, that discussion happens here, and so any differences of opinion with the editorial board of the Sentinel generally comes out at that point. The other big issue is that we all, as individuals, have to remember that when our city charter addresses the council, it's not talking about individual council people. It's talking about the council as a body. Each of us as council members really has no authority to speak for the city or the city council unless a topic has been discussed at the council, because your opinion, my opinion, we all might have different opinions. And so to respond to an editorial, which is, somebody's opinion, by another opinion from an individual council person really isn't appropriate.
I agree with that.
If there's going to be a response, it should be discussed by the council. The council should agree on what the response is going to be, and then generally authorize the mayor to respond. That's the basis for that method of operation as for the 35 years that I've been involved with the council, so.
Okay. Well, I'm glad that I sent it to Mike at the same time as I sent it to the Sentinel, because, otherwise they'd have probably published it. And my just concern was that if the Sentinel says something that I think is blatantly wrong, that somebody should address it. And maybe, like you say, I guess I agree with that. If it's gonna come up, which I think it is, isn't it, in the next month or two in meetings, right? The Airbnb thing as far as.
Well, I think, when we, at the last planning commission, we're getting ready to talk to the planning commission, Megan and I, that we're getting ready to look at updating our comprehensive plan. And maybe at that time, it's better to give it a more comprehensive look. How does it impact our community? What are the land use implications and that whole thing, rather than to address it. We'll address it at that time as part of a much larger macro process.
Oh, so you weren't even looking at dealing with that until after this comprehensive plan is done?
Or during it. What we had talked to the planning commission in February to give them an idea that the county assessor's office had come and talked to, or the planning department here at the city, about what are we considering, what are we going to do. In February, we talked to the planning commission about, let's keep it on our radar, and then the Visit Fairmont, or the Convention and Visitors Bureau, provided a letter to me that I was supposed to forward to the planning commission and the city council, which I did, and then the Visit Fairmont folks were at the planning commission. So it was basically them saying, here's our position paper on it for going forward.
Okay, well, my question is then, I was thinking that from the discussion at the planning commission that we were possibly gonna try to come up with something, since a lot of communities are starting to look at it now.
Well,
But that could be a year or two then.
we are looking at what other communities are doing and what seems to make the most sense. What I think would be best, and for the consistency, is maybe the legislature should address this issue. So if I own an Airbnb in Fairmont, it's the same as if I were in Jackson, or the same if I were in Minneapolis instead of everybody having their own rules and that sort of thing. But I think it's something we certainly should study. We have 3 right now, and I myself, and I just don't think it's a real problem right now. I agree. One of the things that came up at the Planning Commission is, you know, if we see a number of people starting to go down to get into this business, we don't want them to do that and then all of a sudden throw all kinds of regulations on them. So we're trying to be proactive. We have 3 now, and I think in the course of time, we'll be able to come up with something, but I'm not ready to just jump and get right on the bandwagon with that.
The other reason I'm glad that I got cut off then is because you can correct me, because what I said in the letter in response to the editorial sounds like it's wrong. I thought it was right, but my thinking was that under current city code, you can't run a business out of your house.
Well, under current city code, we're not talking about a business. You can buy a house, or I could buy a house right now and rent it.
But that's under the rental code.
But under the rental code, or I can rent, there's nothing in city code that prohibits me from renting a room out
Okay,
to a guest. And it's not a bed and breakfast. We specifically address bed and breakfast as under a conditional use permit. And I don't know that our code specifically addresses that if you can rent it for a day, a night, a week, 30 days, 6 months.
so
There's nothing
does
that's
the rental
prohibiting
code, does the rental code have a time limit in? I haven't looked at it to say only rentals that are more than so many days.
I think it's more than 180 days. I'd have to
Can't
look.
tell you off the top of my head.
But I
But it's
think
so
there's,
considered to be a long-term rental.
Right, yeah,
Versus, the comparison in our rental code is with hotels.
right.
Hotels are 1 night, 2 nights, 3 nights. If you own a rental property, that's long-term rental.
Right.
Maybe that's month to month, maybe that's, a year at a time, but something that's not a hotel. So, I think that the Airbnb and Vrbo issue is very complicated, and I think it's very fluid still, and you have a lot of issues involved there that I would rather see how communities are addressing that versus just throwing something out there and saying you can or can't do it.
It is complicated.
It's very complicated.
And there's an insurance component, which
Makes it more
lo and
complicated.
behold, that I'd bring that up.
Yep.
No, that makes
It's
sense.
probably not being addressed properly in many circumstances. I'm not saying anything locally, I'm just saying as a rule of thumb. I speculate a lot of them are not correctly covered.
Right, now, my only thought was, and I missed the last planning commission meeting, my thought was, wow, if we only have a couple, 3 right now, this is the time to get on it before we have 75 or 100, and then when we enact something, then everybody's mad, and I thought, and if it's not that easy, but like you say, if there's not enough issues out there, then it'd be better to wait, but.
well, and I think we haven't had any complaints, and I think that if I did a list on the county manager's listserv, and I think I've received 20-some responses, and I can tell you that most communities that have responded were thinking about it and talking about
Right,
it. And those that have passed ordinances, none of them are the same.
Right,
And so there's a lot of speculation on what's going to work, what's not going to work. And, I've talked to an attorney of one of the property owners and a property owner just today and Friday about the issue, and what they want to do is both of them want to be part of the discussion.
well, that's a good idea.
We'll get them in here as we progress, and again, things are happening. Megan and I are doing a lot of background research and that sort of thing. What's working? What are some of the problems? How are they being addressed? And so when we do start the discussion, we'll have some better information.
Good, well, thanks for the update on that, I'm glad I included you in that email so you could neuter me properly.
Thank you.
I didn't realize you had sent it, and I thought you were asking what I thought about doing it.
Thank you.
Thank you. Ruth?
Yep, on behalf of the city council, I'm on the CER advisory committee, and just so that everyone knows, the, April 2018 through September 2018 catalog is out, and if you didn't get one either via mail, you can always pick one up various places around town and at the CER office. And also, one other thing is, just so you know, I am attending the full commission meeting for Region 9 on Wednesday night in Mankato.
Okay, thank you. Anyone else? I just have one thing that I'd like to bring up, and it kind of it goes with our pets, keeping our pets on a leash. And Good Friday, I had one phone call, and I saw somebody in Hy-Vee, and the person that called me said that they were disappointed in their neighbor and their neighbor's actions, and that the dogs weren't on a leash as city ordinance it's an expectation of all of us that live in the city of Fairmont. And the other second one was was a lady that is very afraid of dogs, and she's also a runner and an avid walker, and she has encountered numerous dogs that are not on leashes. And so this is a friendly reminder to the community of Fairmont that there is a city ordinance on the books that pets have to be on a leash at all times. And that doesn't mean a dog collar, a shock collar on your dog. It means your pet has to be on a leash at all times. And going back to the shock collar, one of the things that is terrifying to people that are walking or running is that you may know that your dog has a dog collar and that you have control of your dog, but the runner or the walker or the pedestrian just doesn't know that. And I would assume that's one of the reasons why shock collars are not mentioned in the ordinance, that's an okay way to keep your dog. I've heard complaints of people that are avid walkers out at Cedar Creek Park on the bike trail there, on the bike trail at the Day Farm, that nice bike trail there. And I get it that it's a nice place for pets to roam and for them to just run like crazy because it's a nice open area, but it's not what the ordinance states. And I checked with Mike before today, and a few years ago, the city invested $30,000, city taxpayers' money, $30,000 in a very nice dog park. And there was private donations of $15,000. So that was $45,000 of an area where small dogs, big dogs can go to run. And so I highly encourage people to use that. It is very well used, and I did not know this until right now, but that park is open all year round. That the park is cleaned out so that dogs can go there, and the trail is cleaned out for people that want to walk down there. So that certainly is a place that you can take your pet to let them run, and in a gated area where people are safe. And so I just please be a good neighbor and be a good person in the community that follows what the ordinance has to say. And so said what I needed to say about that.
I appreciate you bringing that up because I've gotten some of those concerns, and you said it really well. The only thing I want to reiterate is that I totally understand that there are some dogs that can be off a leash and be perfectly fine.
I do too.
It's just the way it is. You can't do a partial thing. You just have to, it's too bad, but that's kind of how it goes.
Right. And if people have concerns, they can call Mike Humpel or Megan at City Hall if you have concerns about a certain area or a certain residence that you see that's happening. So please use them or council members because then we can let Mike know what we're hearing, and it can move forward there. So thanks for listening to that. Is there anything else that the council would like to talk about? If not, is there a motion to adjourn this meeting? Motion made by Zarling.
Second.
Second by Cyphers. Is there any further discussion? All in favor of the motion say aye.
Aye.
All opposed? Motion carried, and the meeting is adjourned.